And please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and redeemer. Amen. I'll explain the chair in a second, but first I want to tell you another story. When I was in first grade, my family returned to the UP of Michigan, and I grew up in the city of Negaunee, Michigan. And from grades 1st through 12, all through elementary school and in many of my junior high school classes and my senior high school classes, I was blessed by having the presence of my classmate, Judy. Judy was a unique soul. She probably still is a unique soul. I don't know what happened to her. But at the time, I remember having sort of a pity for her, as well as at the same time sort of not a pity for her. Judy really did have a tragic upbringing. Hers is a sad story. Judy was born to parents who liked the bottle more than her, and often they'd spend a lot more money at the bars than they would on her. Judy missed a lot of school when she was young because I'm sure no one was home to make sure that she would get to school. And when she'd get to school, often she was sick. Many times she was very dirty and unkept. When I picture her this day, I remember her long brown stringy hair. I remember dirty clothes. I don't think there was a rank odor, but my first memories of her were an unkept child that seemed unloved. And if she was unloved at home, she was even more unloved at school. Because you know how kids can be. We took advantage of her economic situation. We took advantage of her rough home life. We took advantage of her unkeptness. We took advantage of someone that we determined to be an outcast by no choice of her own. Really, I think Judy was the target of much bullying, and really, I don't think we had, unfortunately, a problem with that. To make matters worse for Judy, she was the most uncoordinated person that ever existed in the universe. She defined klutz. And so often when we were on the playground playing games, she was on the outside, and gym class was always a humiliating experience for her as well. Of course, now I'm 50 years old, and so it's not old school. But back then, when we had a gym teacher, it was old school. And he had this really bizarre and awful practice I hope is not continued to this day. But what he'd do is he'd randomly pick 2 kids from the class to be the team captains, no matter what we were playing, whether it be volleyball or kickball, or remember wiffle ball, those old days, or dodgeball or Red Rover. He would choose 2 people to be the captains, and then the captains would go out to the gym floor, see our classmates sitting on the bench, and we'd point to who we'd want to be on our team taking turns. And of course, the first people chosen were the best athletes or the most popular kids. It was just a popularity contest. And Judy, of course, was always the last person chosen. No one wanted her on the team. When I was in 5th or 6th grade, the same gym teacher who must have had a cruel streak going that day chose my twin brother and myself, 2 identical twins, to be the team captains. So we had the weird situation of brothers picking each other's opponents out. My brother went first, and he chose Rob Lind, and I was angry because Rob Lind was by far the best athlete in our school, and he would remain the best athlete all through junior high and high school as well. And I knew as soon as he said that name, the game was over. And so I was looking, and I saw all the classmates looking anxiously, who was going to be the second best? Who was going to be chosen next? Who would be okay in my eyes and the eyes of the others? And I saw Judy off to the side, sitting apart, head down. I knew that she had given up already any hope of ever being chosen. And so for some reason beyond my ability to think or reason why, I heard myself, to my surprise this day, saying her name, Judy. I won't say her last name. And the entire class laughed. Not only did the class laugh, so did that gym teacher. Everyone laughed but me and her, and she looked up, she looked down, she looked up, and I did the wave forward, and she came forward. And she had tears in her face. I'll never forget the look on her face. It was a mix of relief, of gratitude, of acceptance, for at long last in her life of misery, someone had said yes to her. Someone had chosen her to be on the team. And to this day, I'm convinced it was God at work through me. It wasn't me saying, Judy. It was God working through me saying, hey, Judy, I'll throw you this bone. I'll give you this reminder. And I share this story because that's the reality. That's the gospel in our lesson today. God chooses us. God chooses each and every one of us. The person that we see in the mirror, God says, hey, I choose you. The person we're seated next to, God says, I choose you. The person behind us says, God says, I choose you. The person in front of us, God says, I choose you. The person we're married to, God says, I choose you. The child we bore, God says, I choose you. The parent we have, God says, I choose you. For that is the inexplicable great mystery of faith. That the God who became one of us and one with us, the God whose birth we celebrated at Christmas, the God whose resurrection we celebrate in this Easter season, the God of all knowledge, of all power, the master of the universe who created everything and beyond, says to us as individuals, you belong to me. I choose you, and I know your name now and forever. That's the gospel. That's the good news. God says to each and every one of us, I choose you. It's the great mystery. Old Martin Luther once said, show me a worm that can understand a human being, and I'll show you a human being that can understand God. And despite that great mystery, despite the separation of our natures, God says, hey, I choose you. You are my friend, and I abide with you. Remember that chosenness, and I'll switch now into the transition of this chair. As I walked in this morning, someone said, hey, do you want to wash that chair? And I said, it was washed yesterday. It really was. You wouldn't believe how dark the sink water became in the utility sink of our laundry room at home when I went to work on this chair. See, I had a strange week because I was back in Negaunee, Michigan, and I was there because we were clearing out my father's house as he's now made the transition into a nursing home. He had a rapid decline in health since November, and all roads led to him being admitted into a nursing home. And so now my siblings and I had to clean out his house and get it ready for sale, which is far easier to say than it was to do, for my father, on top of many things, is a hoarder. And being a hoarder means there's all kinds of junk, just garbage, garbage, garbage. You wouldn't believe what we were taking to the dumpster. And what became at first an insurmountable task of like, oh, good Lord, what is going on here? What was he thinking? We had to laugh and we had to cry at the same time. We found treasures linking ourselves to our past, especially to my mom who died young. All reminders of her and her family literally had been buried under mounds and mounds of paper and other things my father had accumulated over the years. And so we'd find things and we'd come back and we realize, wow, the story goes on. And so down in the basement, I found this old chair. And at first I was going to heap it into the dumpster thinking, oh, no one will even take the time to restore it. And then I had a change of mind. Well, the chair not only brought me back to her, it also brought me back to her previous generations. For this chair is old. It could easily be 100 years old, might even be older. I know this because this was a chair that was around my grandparents' table. My grandparents had 10 chairs around a big kitchen table, all painted the same color. The table was blue, the chairs were blue, and below the blue there is some green, obviously the handiwork of my grandmother. And my grandmother, I'll say in love, was a very, very formidable presence. She was Dutch in heritage, and the Dutch are naturally tall, and she was rather stern, and if you don't want to be on her bad side, trust me. She was a tough lady. I take pride in that fact that she was tough, but she knew what life was about, and she knew exactly where she stood on everything she believed in, and you always knew where you stood with her. She was not an overly demonstrative person. I don't think I've ever seen her hug or kiss anyone in her life, and I doubt she ever aired the words or voiced the words, "I love you," to anyone. But she didn't need to, for she had this uncanny ability to draw us to herself, and no matter what she was doing, we were abiding in her presence. Whether she was out in the garden weeding, we'd soon find ourselves in the garden weeding alongside with her. If she was picking apples under the tree, we were picking apples under the tree. If she was in the kitchen peeling potatoes, we'd soon be peeling potatoes. If she was in the living room reading theology, which she'd love to do, we'd be discussing theology. She had this innate ability for you to enter into her life, and for some reason, we didn't need her to say, "I love you," or show that love. We just somehow knew that we were loved. To be with her was to abide in her presence and to abide with her and know some kind of inexplicable love shown towards us. I kind of liken that, of course, to the love of God. For a lot of times, we don't always hear the voice of God say, "Hey, I love you," even though God does choose us. Sometimes God will seem a million miles away or completely absent from our presence. And yet, what we have to do know, beyond explanation, beyond feeling, is that great mystery is true, that God came down to be one with us, as one with us, to abide with us, and chooses us as his own. And whether we feel the direct presence of God in our hearts or if God seems a million miles away, the truth remains the same. God says, "I choose you. You belong to me, and I know your name," and that makes all the difference in the world. So as we were going through my father's house this week, we were having many, many bittersweet moments. Remembering my mom who died decades ago. She sort of became one with us again as we found various items linked to her presence and her time here. We also had to come to terms with my father's illness and his change. We had to come to terms with our own mortality, so to speak, as we saw ourselves no longer as little children, but now as adults, making plans for retirement, and seeing our babies as young grown men and women, and we're wondering, where in the world did the time go? And as we were clearing out that mess, that hoard, like I said, you either had to laugh or you had to cry. My siblings and I, all being on the snarky side, started to sing hymns that we made fun of all of our lives. See, we grew up in the church, and we made fun of the church all of our lives. We made fun of you. Yes, we really did. Trust me. Trust any PK, that will happen. Well, anyway, my less than pious siblings started singing "Abide with Me" in very, very dramatic vibratos as we would need that comic relief. And I'm a hymn snob like they are, but I wasn't taking it in the same vein as they were, for I was thinking about how true it is. I was watching my father go through the process of not only grieving his health, his change in situation, and very honestly grieving the loss of his possessions. I also had the realization that he and God are very tight, and that he was abiding in the presence of Jesus, and Jesus was with him, and that no matter what was going on, as hurt as he was, and as confused as he was, that he also knew that he belongs to Jesus. And that was giving him the power to go through what the rest of us are going through, and greater aplomb and dignity than I think most would. So he knew what we all have to remember, and that's the gospel truth of today, that the God beyond understanding, the God of all mystery, the God of all power, is the God of all love, and says, "Hey, you belong to me." And suddenly the commands of this lesson don't seem like commands. Commands always have that sort of you do not do this thing. My old grandmother, who would be well over 100 now, would always use the word dasn't. You dasn't do this. And dasn't means you better not. And if grandma said dasn't, you better listen. Trust me on that one too. How often do we think of commandments like that? Even when we look at the 10 Commandments, we think, you shall not, you shall not, you shall not, you shall not. But on the converse with the you shall not, there's the you shall do, which is always a lot more freeing. The same God who came to us as one of us, and today in this Easter lesson, although it's the night before he's crucified, says, hey, love me as I love you. That's the command. But it's not so much a command. It's an invitation, I realize now. Just as my grandmother Jeanette would, by some power of unspoken force, say, be with me, abide with me, do what I'm doing, God does the same to us. And says, hey, you soul, I know what you're going through. Abide with me. The reality is, my dear brothers and sisters, I don't know what you're going through today. Some of us are having absolutely wonderful, top-notch mornings and lives full of celebration. But I know there are others here who are facing illness, whose grief is fresh, or whose grief has been rekindled. I know there are folks who are going through separations and divorces. I know folks who are facing unemployment or going through that nightmare. There are all kinds of things that this earthly journey can throw at us. But please know this, whether your time now is good or your time now is less than good, the message is the same. That God is not judging you for what you're going through, but God is with you when you're going through these things. And not only is God with you while you're going through these things, God is saying, hey, believe it or not, I know you. You belong to me. And I choose you. I choose you. No matter what your ability is, no matter what your limitations are, I choose you to abide with me and to abide in me and to love. God's love makes everything endurable, makes everything possible, not necessarily easy, but God's love is there. God says to each and every one of us, I choose you, and obey my command. Love one another as I have loved you, and know that I'm with you to the end of the ages. And to what else can we say but to God be the glory for that gift, for being chosen. Amen.